So let me start in the order in which I would like to address them. Dr. Modi Mwatsama is the Senior Science Lead Food Systems at the Wellcome Trust. Wellcome Trust, of course, quite well known due to the EAT conference they're doing in Stockholm, and you yourself have actually been able to instigate changes in feeding the British population. I think one has to sort of formulate it quite carefully. So thank you very much. You're laughing, but we're going to get back to your laughter and find out why that is in a sec. Ruth Richardson is with us. She is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. And I'd like to say hello to you and looking forward to discussing with you. And to everybody who is watching right at the moment, we have agreed that each and every one has sort of a 2-minute kickoff in the sequence that I address them in. Dr. Zhang is the Secretary General of the Society for Entrepreneurs in Ecology, the SEE Foundation, and you've actually been sort of in close cooperation with the F20 for quite a number of years. Welcome, wonderful that you're with us. A household name for those people who have anything to do with a panda, Manuel Pulgar-Vidal, Climate and Energy Global Practice Leader at the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Hi, great to see you. And last but not least, Chris Killingsworth, Vice President of the Wyss Foundation. You are actually overseeing the Foundation's grant-making programs, including global conservation, women's equality, economic opportunity and democracy. And of course, with women's equality, we have another aspect, like who is actually growing the food that we eat, or especially in some of the countries. I see you nodding, so you're fully on. Let's kick off with Modi. Modi, you were grinning when I said that you've been sort of part of hoping to feed the Brits better. And I can say that because I've been living there, and access to bad food is just plentiful. Now, let's concentrate not just on Britain, let's concentrate on this nexus. What's your take?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to contribute to this panel. So, as we've heard, malnutrition in all its forms is the biggest contributor to the disease burden in all regions of the world. Globally, 1 billion people are underweight, 2 billion have micronutrient deficiencies, and a further 2 billion are overweight or obese. We've also heard that the food system is not supporting environmental objectives. So the major shifts that are needed for us to meet this nexus of food, health and the environment are basically in high-income countries, people need to significantly reduce the amount of meat that they're consuming and increase the amount of plant-based foods like whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts and legumes. And in low-income countries, people diets are currently dominated by starchy foods, and there needs to be a shift from this domination of monotonous starchy-based diets towards more diverse plant-based foods. So the solution to addressing this nexus is really around increasing the biodiversity of the food production system and also the foods that we're consuming in our plates. So a few solutions that can help us achieve that. The first, I would say, is developing integrated food-based dietary guidelines, which meet both health and environmental targets. A recent analysis published in the British Medical Journal found that 85% of national food-based dietary guidelines currently are not aligned with the Paris Agreement targets, for example. Those need to be updated. And then secondly, investments by governments and the private sector also need to be aligned with these planetary reference type style guidelines. That's currently not happening. But things like agriculture subsidies, as well as investments in food marketing budgets, if they were able to align with the Eat Lancet reference date, that would support a shift. And then the third is really about how we can look at getting citizens engaged in these debates and discussions. And a mechanism to do that is really investing in civil society. Civil society both raise awareness amongst the public, create demand for change, and also really important in holding both governments industry and other decisions makers in society to account. So I'd strongly recommend that as another key area to kind of integrating that action. Linked with the integration is as funders is if we're funding foods, civil society advocates and NGOs, I strongly recommend that a condition of funding is that they collaborate with others outside of their sector. So if you're funding environment NGOs, make it a requirement of the funding that they connect with health NGOs working in that sector, with climate NGOs, and that will already help to begin that process of integrating action across the different stakeholders. And the last solution I'll highlight, as I've only got 2 minutes, is I think also the need for integration in the area of information provision. There's currently an imbalance where citizens aren't really able to assess the healthiness or the environmental impacts of the foods they buy. If we could have food labels which actually are able to tell people what the integrated environmental impacts are, whether it's on the greenhouse gas emissions or water, that would be another tool to really help consumers make the right choices, but then also hold companies to account for the products that they're producing. So thank you. That's a brief snapshot of some of my reflections on this.
You try to get in 100 different points in those 2 minutes, and you actually sort of succeeded. Now, let's talk from a point of view of a consumer. We, of course, have two things. We have the tradition, what we eat and what we got used to as kids. That's in our heads. It's going to take a little bit to change the mindset. That is in the sort of developed areas. Also, the question, do I really care about the environment if the bad food for the environment is much cheaper than the food that might be better for my body, but I just can't afford. So that's a bridge for developed countries. And then, of course, we have the other side, those who go hungry, and that's a traditional problem that we've had. In theory, we could feed the world, but we don't yet. Again, I don't expect you to answer all of that in the minute answer, but those are sort of some core questions that we need to address, and maybe also to everybody who's sort of on the food side of speciality.
Yeah, thank you. Those are really good points. If I address the first one around cheap food being, bad food being cheap, yes, bad food is relatively cheap compared to better food at the moment, but actually people are also paying the costs of that cheap, unhealthy food through increased healthcare costs, the high burden of disease I mentioned, things like heart disease, diabetes, diet-related, and consumers are paying for those, either in direct healthcare costs themselves or through their taxes and the healthcare systems. So cheap food is already being paid for, and both in healthcare costs and also the unintended costs on the environment. And I think the true cost of food needs to actually be reflected in food. So rather than people paying 3 times for the food in different places, if that cost could be reflected once in one place, that would perhaps help reduce some of those externalities and make it more obvious about the true cost of food to people. And then the second question is around developing countries. Yes, there is enough food available, it's not equitably distributed. And that is a really big challenge that we need to work out collectively as a global community, what we really value and how we can start to solve some of those problems. I think investments in things like development, in subsidies can go some way to help starting to solve those problems. A significant amount of money goes into subsidizing food production in poor countries, but often those subsidies aren't necessarily aligned with what people need to be eating for their health, or what products needs to be grown or produce needs to be grown to also support the environment. So starting to make those links will also go some way to start helping to address some of these challenges, but I don't have all the solutions.
Thank you very much for this powerful kickoff. And talking about powerful, I've been told Ruth is a powerful voice when it comes to questions on the transformation of the global food system. Now, Ruth, could you please share your view of how we get all of that transformed into a better, sustainable, and within the planetary boundaries?
Yes, thank you, and really appreciate you inviting me to join this. So this session is on climate, biodiversity, and food pathways for inclusive approach. And others like Nicholas and Chip and Modi have covered many of the details on climate, biodiversity, and food. And I would really like to pick up on the phrase inclusive approach and what that means. For me, it means several things. First of all, inclusive approach means a systems approach. Our approach to these issues must be inclusive of the kind of multidimensionality of and the connection between these issues. These issues are inextricably linked, and we must see them as indivisible goals. And for us at the Global Alliance, those goals are, or the principles upon which those goals are based, are 7: diversity, resilience, renewability, inclusion, health, equity, and interconnectedness. These principles define how we bring together our ambitions on climate, biodiversity, and food agendas, and we need to attend to them all. As we say, they're a set, they're not a menu. You can't pick and choose the ones you like, but you have to see them as indivisible. The second thing I'd like to say is an inclusive approach means being inclusive of a suite of solutions. It's easy to slip into singular solutions, especially when we're faced with things such as a global health pandemic and a climate emergency, but it's going to require equal focus on a whole host of priority measures. The Global Alliance has done an analysis of 8 years of our work with partners and grantees and allies, and we've come up with a list of priorities that keep surfacing, which suggests to us that these are the ones that we need to pursue. In the interest of time, I'll just mention 2. One is agroecology. Agroecology is gaining momentum as a climate solution. A recent study from BioVision and the Food and Agriculture Organization reveals that 12.5% of the NDCs explicitly mention agroecology as either a climate adaptation strategy or as a mitigation to climate change. We only need to look at the Committee on Food Security last year to see that an increasing number of countries and stakeholders are rallying around agroecology and related approaches as a means to achieve effective transformational change, delivering on much more than climate and food security, but also rights and equity, gender, and so on. The second thing I'll mention is public finance. Build Back Better is not enough. Now is the time to grow and align investment opportunities to redirect financial flows, public, private, philanthropic, towards activities that stimulate food systems transformation and away from harmful actors and practices. Finally, the third thing I'd just like to say in my short time is inclusive approach means meaningful and authentic engagement of diverse people and organizations in transparent deliberations, shared power, democratic decisions, and collective actions for the public good. Multi-stakeholder, yes, but more than that, it means creating additional space for those most impacted and or marginalized communities, including smallholder farmers, women, and Indigenous peoples. This is particularly true in the new reality of COVID, which makes inclusion of these communities even more difficult. As we head into the Global Food Systems Summit, the Climate COP, the CBD COP, we must be prioritizing this kind of engagement and not allowing haste, complexity, and pressure to lure us into taking shortcuts. So many thanks, and I look forward to the discussion.
Stefan?
It's always inspiring for me, and I mean it. I really mean it. Inspiring for me to listen to you, Ruth, and also having had the honor to be at some of your events in the pre-corona days, and also attending in the events that you organized after that. I always have to say, you really get it. I think you really have a very sort of very decisive approach and a very clear understanding on the different dynamics. So my question is, and I don't have the answer for that, but looking on the 2 priorities of agroecology and public finance, if those are the 2 tracks, what is the rate limiting factor? What is holding us back? Speaking about pathways and walking the talk, we had this yesterday. What's holding us back, really? What is the one thing that really needs to change to really take those pathways?
Well, that's a really big question. And I'm not sure I have the answer either, except to say, well, I think just maybe 2 things. One is I think that it is our collective imagination. There's a quote that I constantly quote, which is that the truth about stories is that's all we are. Our policies are stories, our budgets are stories, our dietary guidelines are stories. They're stories we tell ourselves and each other. And so I think part of it is we have to shift the stories we're telling ourselves. about what is actually possible. So that would be one thing for me. The other thing would be really just, it's about political will. You know, we can do this. We know the solutions. Listening to Nicholas and Chip and Modi, like we know what we need to do. And it's just about, you know, rolling up our sleeves and doing it, and having particularly our governments provide that leadership in terms of the kinds of things that we need to act very quickly on to get us out of these multiple emergencies that we're facing. And
what generates political will? Because we always see this as one of the decisive factors, and I tend to get not that you said it, but when you are at this event and you hear political will is sort of, you know, the key thing to do. Yeah, okay, we got it. But what does it? What generates those political will, or what is actually holding politicians back to take those decisions?
Yeah, well, we could have a whole conference on that.
Yeah, I guess so.
I think part of it is, you know, as we know, it's party politics, it's short time frames, it's fear of, you know, not being reelected. It's, you know, there's a whole host of things that I think that folks have identified over time.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you break out of that? And I simply don't know the answer to that, but I would love to have that discussion.
Maybe we also need a new generation of politicians. However, you know, that's where the sort of snake bites into its tail. Thank you for now. We're going to go into the panel discussion proper later on. And with that, I'd like to bring in Dr. Zhang Li, Society for Entrepreneurs in Ecology at Beijing Normal University. You're also a professor, so you have to deal with young Chinese all the time. Then maybe I'm going to ask you that question in the panel discussion, so they might sort of, you know, make a mental note of that. What would they say if suddenly you would tell them, well, you shouldn't eat all these nice new foodstuffs that are suddenly out there? But that's the second question. Let's concentrate on biodiversity and conservation biology. What is your take on that side of the equation for the challenges that we see at the moment?
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. As you know, that next May, China will host the CBD Conference of Parties 15th conference in Kunming. After postponed a couple of months, I believe it could be, should be an important global conference to talk about how our next 10-year goal to protect biodiversity. And it's great pleasure that SEE Foundation, in partnership with Company for Nature and F20, and as well as WRI, we will launch a report on climate, biodiversity, and food, which I believe that is really important to link this top three crises of the world, so that we can have a better understanding on how nature-based solution could be benefit for biodiversity, climate, and food. I would like to briefly introduce the three experiences pilot projects of SEE from China. One is in Inner Mongolia in partnership with local community people and with support from the Alibaba Group and Ant Finance. We introduced a project called 1 million soso tree to this extremely drought desertification area. In the past 5 years, we support local farmers to plant nearly 50 million local species of trees, mainly represented by soso, local species trees, and local Inner Mongolia people, they also plant herbal medicine under the soso tree, so that they can, first of all, to prevent desertification in that very drought area, but meanwhile, they can also benefit by selling the traditional Chinese medicine, herbal medicine, to earn money to instead the traditional sheep farming or herding that made the desertification main reason for the desertification in that area. The second case is underground water conservation in Inner Mongolia. We call desertification desert millet. In that particular area, we support local farmers to plant millet to replace corn to save the underground water. Well, local people can find alternative way, livelihood to save underground water and to gain the capacity to combat this the climate crisis, the change of the local climate. The third case is from my research field in Yunnan, the border province to Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, where there are about 300 lost remained Asian elephant distributed in that particular area called Xishuangbanna. With a climate model, my team did a research 2 years ago that in next 50 years, the suitable habitat for Asian elephant in China, there will be a 50% of the suitable habitat for Asian elephant disappeared if we cannot stop the climate warming. We talk about the protection for those endangered Asian elephant. But meanwhile, we also need to consider how we can support local community and to support the alternative livelihood for local communities under the climate crisis. So since 2017, SE Foundation in partnership with Alibaba and Payment, we provide support to local communities by providing traditional herbal medicine and by providing honeybee keeping training and to support local people's alternative livelihood, so that we not only address the community-based conservation for Asian elephant, but we also trying to address this climate-related crisis at a local level. With these three cases from the field, I believe that we definitely can provide successful case and show the policymakers and the general public that nature-based solution for biodiversity and climate and food, they are possible and is achievable. So we need to certainly to have those policymakers to address this global crisis with this pilot and successful cases from the field. That's my main point I want to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And of course, we know that COP15 had to be shifted to next year because, of course, COVID-19. China was hit as one of the first countries. Has COVID-19 actually changed the attitude of lawmakers on the role of biodiversity in conservation? Have you seen sort of changes happening there? Maybe is there more urgency?
Definitely, the COVID-19 make a lot of changes to the lives living in China and globally. And the policymakers in China, they did make a significant change in the past months on a couple of policies, especially on the biodiversity conservation. For example, in this February 21st, the People's Congress China issued a decision to ban wildlife consumption nationwide. That means all the captive bred wildlife should not be consumed. And it's a law now, and many provinces with wildlife farms, they started to deal with the captive bred animals used to be for consumption, but now they were shut down. And meanwhile, I believe that the COVID-19, the new viruses lead not only the policymakers, but the whole generation, the people, reconsider the relationship between the human and the nature. Because we used to talk a lot about how to use biodiversity, how to utilize the nature resources, but we need to reconsider the relationship between human and the nature, because it's we need to choose another way to survive in the world. I do believe that the virus made a good lesson to all of us.
Many thanks, Zhang Li, for being with us and for joining F20 for already a couple of years now. And it's a pleasure of working with you, I have to say. In particular, our last effort together with CHIP and the Wyss campaign for nature on this attempt from our end to provide an actionable solution linking the Convention on Biodiversity and the UN climate body, and really addressing both challenges in the same time with this concept of how we would understand a good process of nature-based solutions. So I think this is really a great effort. We've just completed it, and we will be launching it, the three of us together with the World Resource Institute in the next weeks to come. But one question I certainly have is, and that's of course why it's also great to have you being based in Beijing. As you said, the presidency of the next Convention on Biodiversity of the COP15 is with China. Do you see there a readiness of really getting this great deal for nature off the ground?
I believe it so. Society for Entrepreneurs in Ecology Foundation got invited by the Ministry of Ecology and Environmental Protection to form, in partnership with 8 civil society members, to form a civil society alliance for biodiversity conservation years ago. And the alliance present NGOs and research institutions to support China working with this negotiation of biodiversity goals in the past months, as well as public awareness and education. I believe China is want to prepare fully prepared a successful CBD conference of parties in next May. And I believe that with the effort of all of us, we can make a, very ambitious goal for next 10 years for biodiversity.
Thank you very much. We're of course going to come back to you when we all discuss together, and I would then encourage everybody to sort of throw questions at everybody else. We now come to the 2 minutes that's open for Manuel Pulgar-Vidal. Now, we all know that WWF is one of those voices that everybody is listening to, not just because you've got this beautiful panda sort of as the animal that's also no longer on the pathway to extinction. So that's one of the species that's well off. How much do you still, as a NGO, have to actually push? I mean, when we hear the voices of the foundations, when we hear the voices of the governments that we have heard today, of course we are talking to the converted here, they seem to be almost on the same line. So where is WWF having to still push and say, you know, maybe you've forgotten this?
Yeah, thank you, Connie. And let me start by saying that I recognize Chip and Nicholas made of the huge importance of nation-based solutions. But you know, nation-based solutions, it is something that we have to care, and we should make advance step by step. And let me be clear on what I am trying to say. We have a concept, nature-based solution, but we are not fully aligned around the concept. And for me, that is the first recommendation. So not every intervention in nature, it is a nature-based solution. And that is really important to address. Yeah. Chip mentioned the IUCN concept. with which I am fully agree, and we do need to create a common ground to be clear what does it mean nation-based solution. And probably the most important idea behind the IUCN concept, it is that it is to address a societal challenge. That is key, and that is why nation-based solutions could be and must be a key element to address climate, biodiversity, and food. So that is my first recommendation, to align us well around a common concept, a collective concept. The second one, it is that after that, what we do need, it is to address ways to track progress. So that is why it is so important that IUCN has just released the standard, that are kind of criteria to help organizations, countries, people to identify clearly how they could track progress in their nation-based solution actions. And that moves me to the third one, that Chip in some way has already mentioned. We do need to mainstream nation-based solutions into the two most important conventions. Climate, that fortunately it is happening in COP25, they have recognized nation-based solutions, at least for the Standing Committee on Finance, and for COP26, the presidency has defined that concept as a priority, but that is not happening in the CBD. And this is something that we should address. Unfortunately, and this is not to blame anybody, the biodiversity community, it is more conservative. They are keeping the idea of ecosystem-based approach, and they are not recognizing the huge opportunity that by aligning the concept in between the two conventions, they can take advantage of. So we do need not only to bring nation-based solutions into the biodiversity, but also to be more clear in the definition of the goal and the targets and the means of implementation. Because, Connie, look, when we think about climate, it is clear that we can talk about a trajectory. That trajectory is towards 1.5. When we think about biodiversity and even the draft, the 0.5 draft, there are no way to define trajectory in our actions to address nature loss. So we do need to rethink that draft in a way to have better ways to address nature loss with a clear trajectory. My four ideas, it is that what we do need, it is to recognize the role of science. Nicholas mentioned what the IPCC land report defined as what it could be the benefits or the cost of addressing different kinds of interventions to nature. And that is something that we should follow. The fifth one, it is that the only way to make an even bigger opportunity when we think about nation-based solutions, it is by mainstreaming not only in the global process, but in the domestic level. So I am thinking on NDCs for climate, MBSAPs for biodiversity, planning process, long-term visions, and all those kinds of planning processes that countries are used to using to define a clear vision. And finally, and probably the most difficult thing to say, it is that in this nexus, in this link in between nation and climate, there are still contentious things, a strong contentious thing. And I am referring, for example, what is the role that nation-based solutions could play in the net zero approach? No? What are those residual mitigation actions that it could be addressed by nation-based solutions? Or what do we think about offset? Offset, it is a contentious topic because for many organizations, offset could mean a greenwashing way to address their own objectives. So we don't need to talk about those contentious things. It is the only way to strengthen this nexus in between climate and nation.
Thank you very much. I believe Stefan has a question.
Always, if I may, if I can, then.
You mean if I'm not faster?
And Manuel, we didn't discuss this question before, so you can also say I'm not going to refer to that. But you've been a minister for environment in your home country for a couple of years, and you were in the eye of the storm of a climate conference, the one prior to Paris, so probably one of the most important COPs that we had so far. Speaking about political will and what generates political will, from your experience, now being with a large civil society organization, What do we have to do to really regenerate this political will, except the fact that, of course, political powers are a renewable source, and of course there can be new heads coming in. But no, this is also about, making the point and generate this political will in the existing system. So from your background, from your experience, what convinced you to actually take action?
There are many ways to do it, and this is something that you have already asked Ruth. But let me share with you 3 ideas. The first one, it is that the political will, it is the result of a bottom-up and top-down process. And when I think in the bottom-up, what we do need it is to convince our government that climate responsibility, it is part of their future. It is interesting. I am, Stefan, now saying in my country, in most of the Latin American countries, and this is going to sound weird, that it is not about an agreement. That for sure, I am fully convinced that we must address and achieve the Paris Agreement. But it is more than that. It is about our economy. It is about our future. It is about our development. And what I am trying to explain in my country and in Latin America, it is that if we are not able to address climate objectives, our economy or our products, export products, are going to be rejected in the future, really in the current climate economy. So the narrative in between climate and the economy, it is key to convince. So this is the first. The second one, it is more related to the global thing. So in a COP, so in this kind of negotiations, Stefan, you need to present alternatives. And in a COP, there are always alternatives to address any topic. And you do need to recognize that this is a country-driven process, a party-driven process. So you do need to develop your ideas step by step, with cautious, but also with all your power. Because, for example, probably for many people, the recognition of nature-based solutions in COP25, it has not been enough. And for sure, it has not. But it has been the first step. So at least now we do have in the climate debate, nature-based solutions as part of the Standing Committee on Finance. Now we can move into the next step. And that is the way, the gradual way in which you can address that political will. So this is my second idea. And the third idea is by bringing to the public sector, to the countries or to the parties, also what it is happening in the private sector. That is why the importance of what we got in Lima COP20, when we adopted what it was called the Lima Paris Action Agenda, that it was the first time ever in which we included the non-state actors into this political debate. By creating this good relation in between public and private, you can really convince, you can really create those kind of alliances that include not only the business sector, for sure, also includes the sub-national government. So I think this is a third way to create this political will. And probably there are many others, but these are 3 that I want to share with you to answer your question.
Thank you very much, Manuel. It looks like you could go on and on and on, but of course we have our next speaker that we haven't heard speaking yet. Chris, you've been listening in on all of this. Chris Killingsworth, at the moment I still see Manuel and Mr. Barber. You still look nice with your tie, and we're going to get over to Chris in a second. Mind you, whilst we do that, I'll be sort of formulating my question. It says that you've been working on the protection of millions of acres of land, and of course one of the there you are. One of the issues that we are facing is the degrading of land. So we have less soil to grow more, and keeping up a gender imbalance as far as right to land is concerned. Now, many challenges. How have you overcome them, and what can you share with us on the Nexus question?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. As you've heard from all of the speakers, the answers to the climate and biodiversity crisis are complex and will require many different actions. But I wanted to focus on what you just mentioned, which is protected areas and conservation of land and oceans as a tool, a nature-based solution that that can have multiple benefits across many of these different sectors, as Nicholas pointed out, is so important in the very first panel. The foundation, in 2018, the foundation where I work, the chairman of the foundation, Hans-Jörg Wyss, launched the Wyss Campaign for Nature, which is a 10-year billion-dollar commitment to help accelerate the pace of protected area conservation globally. A central goal of the campaign is to help protect 30% of the planet's land and oceans by 2030. Through that billion-dollar commitment, we're supporting nations, communities, and especially indigenous-led efforts to permanently conserve land, water, and oceans. And we're also supporting the partners to the CBD who are calling for the adoption of the 30 by 30 target and commitment of significant new funding at next year's Conference of Parties, hopefully next year's Conference of Parties. So why this large commitment to protected areas? What we know is that protected areas are the cornerstone of stemming the extinction crisis, which experts are warning could put 1 million species at risk of extinction, many within the next few decades. But this isn't just about wildlife. And as we've discussed, we need answers that can help across the climate biodiversity crisis. And we know that protected areas are critical if the world's going to achieve its climate goals. 1/3 of the solution to the climate crisis will be achieved through nature-based solutions. And we also know that scientists have concluded that without halting the loss of biodiversity, nations will not be successful in delivering on the Paris Agreement, nor on reaching 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, intact areas are absolutely essential to providing basic ecosystem functions, as you all know. And as we've heard woven throughout this, relevant to COVID and that crisis, protected areas are also critical to avoiding the next pandemic by keeping zoonotic diseases from spilling over into the human population. So nature is really the most basic infrastructure that supports our economies, livelihoods, our health, food security, and indeed the quality of life worldwide. There are many things we need to do to rebalance our relationship with nature, and you've heard about those from these excellent set of experts today, but it's clear that any path to restoring the balance with nature requires keeping what's left of our intact systems in place. And fortunately, protected area designation, legally enforceable protected area designation, is a relatively simple, proven, and cost-effective tool that we can implement relatively quickly. A recent study showed that conservatively, the benefits of doing so outweigh the costs by a factor of 5 to 1. So if we're going to take advantage of this great opportunity, the one nature's already built in for us, it will take all of us, governments, philanthropy, and businesses joining together to make protected areas part of the solution. Thank you.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. In Germany, the new thing amongst foresters is to sort of let their part of the woods go wild. Is sort of, not tend to it like a garden. However, of course, there are a couple of other people sort of being completely against that. Is that something that arises from your instigation of new ideas, like we do need protected and therefore sort of unhuman tended areas in order to keep that biodiversity?
Well, I think it's really a range of protected areas. Some will be completely untended or wild without a lot of human intervention. And I think there will be there's certainly room for other protected areas where there are some sustainable uses and other kinds of activities in them. But I think what there's a scientific consensus around is that we need a lot more than we have today, that protected areas are critical to all of the different crises we've talked about, and that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. So, but there are many different types of protected areas. There are many different legal mechanisms, and quite frankly, the takeaway is we need more. We need it fast. And we need to accelerate the pace of designation across the globe.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I've just been looking behind me, not ignoring Stefan, but he didn't want to put in question to you right at the moment. However, in the interaction with everybody, I think we should also allow for interaction between you panelists. So if we can see all of you, and if you can actually help me by raising your proper physical hand, and it doesn't matter whether it's right or left, for you to chip in, then you would help me guide this panel. And I'm quite sure that whilst you might know each other, some of the remarks, and maybe we start with Chip, because you've just done a keynote, and then we talk to everybody else. What's your tummy feeling of what you've heard? How would you want to bind that together, or where do you see absolute discrepancies?
Thanks. I really appreciate being, and I'm honored to be on this panel. I'm an awful lot of material there, and I agree with almost all of it that I've heard. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of points that Manuel made, which I think are important on the how do you get this done politically, the idea of political will and how do you generate it. And I was reminded of the famous quote from Frederick Douglass, who some of you will know, the great anti-racism hero of the 19th century, who said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will." A lot of people have said that, and I think it's true. And when I was a negotiator in the US government, our slogan also used to be, if you get what you want, you didn't ask for enough. And I think this goes to the question of ambition, that sometimes we basically negotiate with ourselves before we ask for something. The 30% target, there are other things out there saying 30% and then on to 50%. We can do this. It's out there in the world. They've seen the recent paper on the global safety net that just came out in Scientific Advances. It can be done, and people thought that was crazy, back 5-10 years ago. So we need to keep our ambition up. The second point is on the controversial aspects of the idea of nature-based solutions. It's extremely true that an awful lot of people in the conservation community, particularly now we just talk to each other on Zoom, everyone talks to the same people all the time. What could possibly be wrong with nature-based solutions? It sounds wonderful. Well, for a lot of people, a lot of things. We have there's a box in our study that deals with what are the points of controversy, and there's the moral hazard controversy, the idea that you're basically saying, okay, industrialized countries created this through fossil fuel-based emissions, this problem, but now all the solutions are going to be dumped on places that still have a lot of natural resources. There was a sticker being passed around, and this is coming from some governments as well as people who are advocates for indigenous peoples and others. It said that our nature is not your solution. So there's that kind of an approach, that it's a moral hazard. There's the idea that we are commodifying nature, natural capital. Mm-hmm. So why do we need to talk about nature as capital? That's something that there's a lot of, and that's been going on since all the days of Red Plus. The idea that this might impose a tyranny of trees on us, as a lot of people say. Forests are not just trees, they're animals and many other things. And there's, it's great that people are planting trees. 1 trillion trees is one campaign which is out there. But if this just becomes massive monocultures of tree planting without looking at how forests actually work, that that's going to be a problem. And one thing I wanted to add in on top of what was said on this idea of, I think it was Ruth who mentioned working with unlikely partners and across the ways you go. I really want to stress how important that is. In our work on the oceans, we have part of this the Secretariat for the High-Level Panel on a Sustainable Ocean Economy, mm-hmm. which has been looking at how do you turn the ocean from being a victim into being part of the solution to climate and food security and things like that. And you need to go out and talk with shipping companies. You have environmentalists and scientists, yes, but you need the shipping companies. You need the offshore wind people, all these folks. There are a lot of solutions out there, but they're not going to happen by just environmentally minded people talking to each other. You're going to have to go out there and engage with people who are not going to agree with you about everything. The cruise ship industry, and lots of others. The Navy. These are all parts of the solution, and it's difficult. You have some difficult conversations, but you often then come to some real solutions, and it changes minds on both sides. So I think those are the kinds of integrated solutions. It's not just integration of the science and the ideas. It's being able to talk across those boundaries, and of course being inclusive and those people that don't get into the conversation. My big fear about the way we interact in this kind of Zoom world is you get great access to people. My boss he chaired 60 ministers in a conference a couple of weeks ago, and every single one of them showed up. That would never happen back in the real world, that you all show up at the same time. But we talk to the same people a lot.
Yeah, we said that yesterday. We probably wouldn't have had such a high power and absolutely fantastic experts either in the panel discussion or beforehand. So yes, and maybe there's a learning in that we don't need to actually sort of fly to every conference. However, sort of meeting each other from time to time is quite good. We have a question in the chat, but Stefan has another question first. And again, to all of you out there that are listening to us, please put your questions into the chat, and to you, please raise your hand so that we can actually see who wants to chip in.
Yeah, many thanks, Connie. And I have a question maybe starting with Ruth, but I'd also be very interested to hear a bit of your thoughts from every other panelist. And that goes a bit to what we discussed yesterday, and it goes to the second of the two priorities that you mentioned, Ruth, next to agroecology. You said it would be public finance, and you said redirecting financial flows. And that certainly was one of the aspects that we discussed yesterday. And early this morning, we heard from the board member of the German Central Bank, but we also heard from our Minister of Finance here in Germany that the question of redirecting financial flows is really important. And I'd love to hear a bit what you mean with that. And we structured the sustainable finance subject yesterday about divestment, invest, and impact investment and public finance regulations. Is that the direction that you also look into?
Yes, thank you for the question, and absolutely, that's part of it, but I think it's much more than that. So I would maybe categorize things in three ways. One is absolutely public finance. I think we really have to look at subsidies, taxes. We have to look at where there are subsidies that are causing harm. We have to look at areas where there's subsidies that actually maybe don't exist that could actually bolster positive solutions. And we certainly have to look at the public tax regime. So there's a whole public piece to the financial flows. The second component, I would say, is other financial flows. We've got private money, we've got bilateral money, we have multilateral money, we have philanthropic money. And much of that is direct disbursements, and much of it sits in endowments as well from the investment side, something you rightly point out. So I think we really have to look at the financial flows beyond the public world. Where are they coming from? Where are they going? And what sorts of things are they supporting? And a big piece of that is on the endowment side, especially for the foundation world. And so I think there's huge potential in redirecting endowments in terms of what the foundations are actually investing in. And then the third part of this, which is different but connected, is something that Modi talked about, which is true cost accounting. And this is part of the whole financial picture. How do we really look at the true cost of food, the true cost of our actions, and recognize that there are huge externalities in these systems that we really have to take into account? And it's something that the Global Alliance has really invested in with UN Environment. We've developed a comprehensive holistic framework on true cost accounting. And we also have set up a community of practice of the main practitioners that are really trying to bring this into political and private sector discussions. So some very exciting work on that front as well.
I saw Modi nodding quite a bit. Maybe you can sort of put your nods into words.
Just wanted to say I support everything Ruth was just saying around, particularly around the true cost accounting approach to really costing the health, environmental, social, wider societal impacts of public sector, private sector, all investments in the food system is absolutely important. And while I have, I guess, the floor, if I can just make two other reflections on some of the issues that were raised, particularly picking up on the point Manuel raised around nature-based solutions being contentious. It sounds like at the moment there isn't necessarily agreement amongst different communities about what's in and out and the definition. I just wanted to add to that, as someone from the health sector, we don't even talk in terms of nature-based solutions. They're not part of our general discourse in terms of the solutions that are needed to improve health. And that's another thing that needs to be considered around, how do we come up with this common language that works across these different communities that really needs to come together. And so, I just wanted to put that out there. There's tensions both within the environment biodiversity community, but others aren't even, talking about it. And then the other question I really agreed with was about being ambitious in asks. And that relates to the political will question. And certainly from the health sector, one example of where we were ambitious in our asks at the time was in the area of soft drinks taxes, which are now being adopted by a lot of countries, but certainly in the UK experience, back in 2014, before they were adopted in the UK, we thought it was a pie in the sky ask that we were going to ask of government. But what we did behind the scenes was nevertheless marshal the evidence on the health impacts of the consumption of those products, how they were impacting children, what the economic costs of those consumption patterns were to the economy, the benefits of the taxes in terms of raising revenue for government. And we were also working with the public. This was when I was working with civil society to really kind of raise awareness and public support for those policies. And so when the policy window opened, in the sense that updated dietary guidelines were published in the UK, which essentially showed that intakes of sugar were 3 times higher than the target levels that this new scientific committee had come out with as a target for the UK, there was this policy window to show that actually there was a solution that had been worked out. It was cost effective, there was strong public support, and that really enabled the tax to be adopted much faster than any of us had actually thought it was ever going to happen. So just to add, add weight to that, be ambitious in your asks and actually do the homework in advance of the policy windows opening, so that when they're open, you can present those solutions to policymakers as this is the solution to the problem that they need to solve.
Thank you very much, Modi, for that last remark. And I saw, Manuel, thank you very much for actually raising your arm. That was quite decisive. On the way of handing over to you, the observation, especially in the UK, as I was living there at the time, is just people were just not aware of it. And it's only sort of if you price it in one way or another as a political message, or really in the finances, or you print it big letters on the orange juice that's half sugar, that people will be able to change their habits. And that's where it's getting to, but that's my observation only. Manuel, with your observation. Manuel?
Yeah, thank you, Connie. Just to complement what Ruth mentioned in relation. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we
absolutely.
can hear you well.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. Probably my connection it is not too good. Okay. Just to complement what Connie has just mentioned about financial flows, public and private, the importance of giving clarity to the financial actors. It is interesting in the public side what it is happening, for example, with the French sovereign bonds. They are putting money of the bonds for climate and nature biodiversity purpose, following a clear taxonomy. Also, it is interesting the good example of the European taxonomy. That is, in my point of view, something that it should happen with nation-based solutions. We do need to give clarity to the financial actors for these public flows. And it is exactly the same with the private one. And there are 2 main challenges in the private one. The first one, it is to solve all these kind of claims, climate positive, climate neutral, carbon neutral, net zero, etc. Nobody knows exactly what does it mean, all of those concepts. Unfortunately, this is something that it has been started to be addressed. So this is my first element, that it could solve the private flow. And the second, it is to strengthen this link in between climate and nature, because and to create also some kind of bankable projects. There are organizations working in nation-based solutions, bankable projects. The private sector, it is looking for this kind of project. So it is not that every bankable project, it is a nation-based solution, for sure. But there is a link in between bankable and nation-based solutions that it could help the private sector to redirect flows into those kinds of actions.
Thank you very much, Manuel. I'm not quite sure, Stefan, you with a question, or shall I ask the question off the chat? Sorry, this is live, so everybody
No,
actually knows.
I think we should give justice to the chat, and those who take the effort to type in things, then we should just raise them, I think.
So let me read it out. To the speakers of the foundations, what do you think foundations or philanthropy can do to support a better recovery from the C-19 crisis and support the Nexus thinking regarding climate, biodiversity and food? Any concrete thoughts or even measures? And again, I'd like to see the raised hand.
More than we have already discussed, I guess.
Yeah, Manuel.
Sorry, Connie, but I think that foundations should align their objectives in some principles for greening the recovery. So what I am trying to say is that actions that could help to greening the recovery should be based in first, real emission reduction, second, clean jobs, third, equitable access, fourth, low cost, fifth, health, that can promote health, the relation between health, climate, and nature, among some others. I think that if foundations are able to not only define these principles and to align around these principles, but also help to identify a specific action that could contribute to greening the recovery, that would be perfect to really push this agenda forward.
And maybe, yeah, I'd like to say I see Chris, and then I see Ruth, and I'd also like to involve Lee in an answer, but maybe you have a little bit of time, Lee, to think about your answer, because Chris is going to start.
Yeah, just following up on what Manuel said, as nations debate recovery measures and recovery packages, I think that we as foundations can support civil society and try to align around building natural solutions and nature, really natural infrastructure discussions into those recovery measures. In many cases, that part of the discussion is completely absent from all the stimulus and recovery measures that are being debated across the world. And I think just aligning our resources and our support of civil society to advocate for those measures right now is incredibly important.
Sorry, I hope that you didn't get interrupted by us. I was just looking at how long time we still have. We have about 10 minutes to sort of, spread that idea. So Ruth, please take it away, and then hand over to Beijing, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank Manuel for raising the issue of principles and foundations being aligned. Within the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, it is an alliance of 27 philanthropic foundations, and we are entirely principles-led. So at the beginning of my earlier comments, I mentioned the 7 principles as a set, not a menu. You have to take all of them as indivisible. And it's been an incredibly powerful experience for me and for our members, where those principles shape our vision, and they're also a diagnostic tool for everything that we do. And they've started to be applied in some really interesting ways. So for instance, we have foundations that are actually applying them to their endowments and their investments, and using that as a screen for what they invest in and how. We also have foundations using those principles as a set to direct their grant-making dollars in terms of the kinds of grants they're providing to their various partners and allies. So I could talk about principles all day, and the power of using principles. And so just really want to appreciate that you raised that and let people know that it's a very viable and very powerful approach.
And with that, Modi and Chip, yes, but first of all, Lee.
Okay, I think first of all, foundations, we need to stay together and be aligned together. As F20, it's a platform for those foundations who want to engage the implementation of a Paris Agreement in G20 20 countries. And in China, SEE, together with another 11 foundations, we formed a Grantmaker Alliance to try to introduce NBS protocols to all different fields. And meanwhile, as foundation, we also should be the bridge between the government policymakers with science and the local communities. For example, as we know that panda is a symbol for conservation, panda only distributed in China, although WWF is a global organization with a panda logo, but we can only find panda in China. How much we spend our money to support panda conservation in China, do you know? I don't have a total figure, but in 2018, Professor Wyss went together with 20 scientists. I'm one of the co-author. We published a paper in the Journal of Current Biology, and we did analysis the value of ecosystem services from all the 67 panda reserves in China. And we found that the government China invested $1 can generate about 20 times ecosystem services value. That means to invest conservation, we can gain the important economy to support local economy from those nature reserves. Another important paper from my research team, we did analysis the ecosystem services and value in the Xishuangbanna Nature Reserve, where my Asian elephant distributed. We found that if 9% of the local forest got destroyed and plant rubber tree and tea for local communities, they did get some money in a very short period. But with the long term of views, the whole ecosystem services in that particular nature reserve will lost about 30 to 40% of the whole value. This means we need to tell the policymakers how important the nature-based solution is and how important the service of the whole healthy ecosystem can provide it to support sustainability of a local economy. So that the foundation can be bridged to link this science-based important fundings together with local community development as well as policy-making processes. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lee. Just expectation management, about 5 to 6 minutes left, which is Modi and Chip have already raised their hand. They should say whatever they want. And then I do a very last round, but only with 3 words, like the 3 takeaways that you want everybody to remember. So Modi, your remark that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, on the COVID crisis, Wellcome as a foundation which specialises in health has been very much involved in helping in launching a COVID Zero initiative, which has been about mobilising resources from other philanthropic foundations, governments, the private sector, to come up with investing in vaccines, support the vaccine trials that are currently underway, as well as finding effective treatments for COVID. So kind of really speaking to its strengths, working out what the solutions might be out of this crisis within the next 5 years, and also looking alongside the kind of medical interventions, what kind of public health solutions governments need to adopt around strengthening health systems, and kind of wider kind of public health approaches. So that's a kind of another angle in terms of the kinds of interventions foundations can do. We also support wider efforts and principles, as others have been talking about, for instance, the greening of the economic recovery that others have been doing. But I just thought I'd add that into the mix.
Thank you very much. Chip.
Just very quickly, thanks. In terms of things that foundations might do, something we've been trying to encourage is you've got a lot of frontline organizations, particularly in developing countries, grassroots advocacy, investigative, civil society organizations, sometimes just communities. And it's getting resources to them, financial resources, technical resources, and political support, because a lot of them are under fire, literally, they're under fire. They're getting killed and intimidated. Building that kind of a bridge, a pipeline to get resources from those who have them and would like to support them, not just giving all the money to the kind of regular suspects who know how to write grant proposals and things, requires a serious investment and cooperation amongst foundations, as well as those of us who can play that intermediary role to go out and identify those communities. And it's often not like an organization. It might just be some people in a community fighting about a particular issue. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done in connecting those who would like to support that kind of work at the grassroots level and helping to incubate and mobilize those people on the ground at that level. And we're trying to play a role as we can. We end up doing this in a very ad hoc way often at the World Resources Institute. So we're trying to work with others to systematize that a little bit more around some key issues related to coasts and forests and basically environmental defense on the ground and all the related human rights issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chip. Now, just imagine that somebody would only watch these next 3 minutes of our whole panel discussion. Give us the 3 words from your point of view that everybody should remember and take away. And Chris, I see that you've already written something down, so that's a good thing about being able to see something. Maybe you'd like to give us the kickoff.
I think I just want to reiterate that nature-based solutions are part of the puzzle here and need to be funded as part of both biodiversity and the climate solution. And then I would harken back to what Ruth said about political will. Without political will, we can't get any of this done. And I think that does start largely at the grassroots level, as Chip said. We are seeing all over the world really grassroots sort of demand for nature-based solutions for all kinds of reasons. And I think that is something that we hope that the global community will expand on.
Thank you very much. 3 points is always very difficult to do. Maybe Lee? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say to unite all like-minded civil society policymakers and foundations are very important for us, so that we can form alliance from different stakeholders to combat the climate crisis, to protect the biodiversity, and to address the food security. So I believe the important is to build alliance and to gain the participation of different stakeholders are very important for us.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lee. Modi?
Thanks. So my main take-home points would be for stakeholders to use the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Reference Diet as the kind of North Star guide to support a transition towards a sustainable food system that helps both health and environment objectives. The transitions that are needed to do that are reducing high consumption levels of meat in high consuming countries, and then at all regions increasing the diversity of the diets through increasing plant-based foods like fruit, vegetables, beans, nuts, and pulses. And investment in the food system should support that.
Thank you so much. Chip?
3 words. So I was thinking about it. Nature. I'm still muted? No.
Yes. No, you're not muted.
Okay. Nature, people, and power would be my 3. And by that, I mean nature. We can't survive and prosper and solve these problems without a focus on conserving and restoring nature. People, we're never going to do that unless we deal with the rights and livelihoods and needs of people, particularly the poorest people. And power, it's not about science, really. Science is important, but clearly it's not. It's about political power, and we have to roll up our sleeves and really work on how do we empower, how do we influence, how do we change, and that's going to happen basically through political processes, which are dirty and filled with compromise and problems, but that's the only way we're really going to get things done. So those would be my 3.
Wonderful. Manuel, 3 aspects.
Thank you. 2, yes, 2. Convergence and integration. Those are the 2 main benefits of working in nation-based solutions. So let's advance in this agenda step by step together. The benefits are there: convergence, integration.
Fantastic, Manuel. And Ruth?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's that we need to identify and resolve contentious issues. We need political will, and we need diverse voices and participation. And for me, all of that means that everybody needs to get vocal and get involved, particularly in light of these critical political opportunities that are coming down the line, like the COPs and the Food Systems Summit.
And with that, I would like to share a bit thank you to wherever you've sort of come on digitally. Absolutely fantastic. And I have learned that in football, in some stadiums, you actually have somebody to give different applause at different times so that the performance is enhanced. We just can do it with 2 to 3 voices here. Absolutely fantastic to each and every one. Keep up the good work, and I think we would like to thank you, and with that finish off this particular panel, but the debate of course isn't over, and I turn over to Stefan, but you haven't got the last word yet.
No, and the first word that I have is actually also a big thank you to everyone, and for taking the time in the different time zones, and for really being open to answer these questions with a new and fresh thought. And I think that was my sense. So I really learned a lot. And I just want to highlight one thing that you mentioned, Ruth, when I asked about what are the rate limiting factors. You said it was a collective imagination, reshaping the stories or reassembling the stories that actually create our thinking. Terminologies create our thinking, and it really starts with the way how we communicate, and then we can really then get active and act on those elements that we've heard of. So thanks everyone again for joining us, and
we still have the Mentimeter.
And I think I was just supposed to say something about tomorrow? Or
no,
is
not
this
yet,
coming
not
later
yet. We still have the Mentimeter.
I see, there you go.
Yeah, this is sort of, creating a program as we go. No, don't worry, we do have a plan. We don't always, we don't always follow it, but all of you that have stayed with us, and I think that's around about 100 people that are still in the stream, all of you know, just before we finish, we want to know your opinion. So either use the QR code or go to menti.com and put in the code that you see there, 98 95 54 and 4. And then you are in the Menti system, and then the question that we have for you, what is your main takeaway in one sentence? And of course, we do need a tiny tad of time until we get the answers. So maybe on the way, you can already sort of tell us what we're talking about tomorrow.
Yes, happy to do this. But just going back a step on this morning when we heard that the 1.5 degrees benchmark, as mentioned in the Paris Agreement, is not just pipe dream or wishful thinking, but it is actually doable. And I find this very important that that means that we basically have to decide which way we go. We are not forced to go this way or that way. It really is a decision whether we keep the global temperature below the dangerous benchmark of 1.5 degrees. And I think this is an important fact to accept. And it was a good start for the day, because then we heard from prime ministers and ministers of finance how this could actually be done. And just to rephrasing the board member of the central bank, the German central bank, who said that a price on carbon is really one of the key factors that will change financial flows. And then in outlaying the different frameworks, central banks and financial institutions like development banks are really in charge and are the place to change those financial flows then.
Stefan, let's have a very quick look at what our participants are actually sharing with us. Working together for nature-based solutions, changing our storytelling is crucial for transformation. The importance of our there it's gone. We need a strong civil society to drive changes. The importance of identifying and resolving contentious issues. What are they? Why are they contentious? And what do we do about it? Collaboration on action and transparency, raising our aspiration. And there seems to be some person who loves multilateralism. This comes again, or maybe it is just really, really, really an important issue. And pricing things correctly, i.e. sort of not have the social costs, but everything else. Now, just for once, you're going to have the last word.
Yeah, well, thanks to you, Connie, for this moderation today. And I look forward to our next day tomorrow. We're going to kickstart this with the executive or the Secretary General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. And that's an institution that really sort of looks into the engine room of the energy transition. And we're really going to hear some of his concepts, how to really unleash further the development of renewables. So that's going to be very interesting. And we're going to hear from Tony Chan just after Francesco La Camera, who's the president of the King Abdullah University and Technology Council, also a very big name in that part of the world. And that will be followed by the recommendations of the different engagement groups to the G20, because that's what we're here for. We want to address the G20 as a group with solutions and with potential pathways that we need to walk on to make them pathways, in fact, and really get to a sustainable development to implement the Paris Climate Agreement.
But the actual presentation or the sharing of the recommendations is going to happen on Thursday, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Grand. So another 2 days, as we said yesterday, 4 down, 3 to go. We hope that you do enjoy being with us wherever you are listening, watching, collaborating, participating in the chat. We hope that you have a great rest of the day, however long that might be. And we hope that tomorrow morning in Berlin, Hamburg, round about 10 o'clock, you're going to be with us again. Again, I would recommend to come in a little bit earlier so that you can hear the great piano sounds of our pianists. And we're back to the F20 climate solutions. We're going to love the stress on the solutions.
Bye-bye.
And ladies and gentlemen, as we tried to get you into a closer cooperation amongst yourselves, we also have the opportunity now to network in our suite that you can actually enter very easily as you scroll down and you go to the, not to the chat, but one further down, and then you get to your tribe, and you can actually chat with everybody that you want to chat with and see everybody that you have not seen in the audience. And with this, it really is goodbye for today.